So right now we have the 29th House District, position 1. And tonight we have Mr. Brett Johnson, who will now give his opening statement.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Brett Johnson. I'm a candidate for 29th Position 1. I'm a lifelong resident, or nearly lifelong resident of Tacoma. I'm an Air Force veteran and a local business owner. And I'm often asked, why am I running for office? Well, the truth of the matter is, I don't actually want to run for office. Every year, I watch new policies be adopted. I watch taxes increase and I pay them. And I watch all of our problems get worse. I'm running because I think I have to. We are not getting what we need from our government, and I believe I'm the representative that can change that. One of the more important things that I think has called me to be successful in this position is both my experience as an air traffic controller in the Air Force and the Federal Aviation Administration, as a business owner, both a general contractor and now in manufacturing with a live edge sawmill. And in those positions, you get to see really on the ground how adversely these poor policies affect both employees, employers, and consumers. One of the events that really compelled me to run was dealing with encampments and crime around my business. And I just had an absolute inept response by the city of Tacoma. And one day, we have a railroad line adjacent to my business. And one day I saw some railroad trespassers kind of tampering with the tracks. And I thought, this is it, I got them, I can get rid of them. Railroad law. So I called Tacoma Rail, and they sent out a representative. And the representative looked at me and said, well, we gotta give them 72 hours to vacate. And I was like, that cannot be right. Because I knew if it was BNSF or Union Pacific, they'd be gone just like that. So I called on my experience as an air traffic controller, where we often dive deep in the weeds in code and law, and we do like to argue, although we don't litigate. And I wrote an email to 30 representative or elected officials and about 10 bureaucrats, one of which was the top representative from National Transportation Safety Board, rail safety. I fired this thing off, and I got a phone call 30 minutes later from the top guy at National Transportation Safety Board, and we had a conversation, and he gave me some advice, and I thought, oh, all right. Anyway, this was the only conversation I had in this exchange, and at the end of 4 weeks of email only, I got an email from the Tacoma city manager saying, Mr. Johnson, you're correct. Tacoma police have been trained on RCW 86, whatever this railroad law, and we can now expeditiously move people out of harm's way and ensure safety. And I thought, man, I just got more done in 4 weeks by email than most of these officials do in 4 years. So that's what I'm running.
Okay, at the governor's request and passed by the legislature on a party line vote in 2021, the Climate Commitment Act, Senate Bill 5126, became law. Part of that law includes a greenhouse gas emissions cap and invest program that will begin on January 1st, 2023. Based on the Department of Ecology's projections released this summer, Washington State's new tax on CO2 emissions will add about 46.6 cents to the cost of a gallon of gas in 2023. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Washington residents already pay about 70 cents a gallon more than the average price in the U.S. What is your position on the law, and what action needs to be taken, if any?
Sure. So I think that law definitely needs a look, probably a repeal and replace. I think it's another example of I'm going to say with the benefit of the doubt, a well-intended law with some very, very high potential for unintended consequences. One of the larger concerns that I have on that gas tax increase is for people that are on the lower end of the economic scale. And as we're trying to improve the climate, we're now putting people in a position where it's affecting their ability to feed their houses, putting them perhaps in jeopardy of housing stability. And the policies that we adopt and enact need to be they need to deliver for everyone. So there's nothing wrong with trying to improve the environment and reduce our emissions. I think that's a fine thing. But overturning our entire economic system over a program that really is not going to make a substantial difference in the gross amount of world carbon is not something that's good for any of us. And I will oppose that, and I would like to repeal and replace it with a common sense approach that yields reduced carbon and taxes not increased, but maybe being better stewards of the tax monies that we already have.
The U.S. Supreme Court, as a result of its June 2022 landmark decision, Carson et al. Versus Macon, has now made it clear that no state may prevent families from using a generally available public tuition assistance program to send their children to private religious schools. Lawmakers in Washington State are now free to debate choice bills like the 4 bills that were introduced during the 2022 legislative session. Those bills would have given families who want options up to $10,000 to send their children to private school. If the state legislature would have passed these bills, private religious schools must be included in the list of possible options families have to educate their children. What is your position on this issue and the legislation introduced in 2022?
So I'm also opposed to this legislation. I think when we create expanded access for schools, when we limit the schools that these funds can go to, we are infringing on First Amendment rights, and we're also infringing on the ability of the quality of the educational institution that people may go to. So perhaps there may be a religious educational institution that a family, specifically on the lower income, that is religious, that may more closely align with the programs and the values that reflect their family and their upbringing. And I think we should protect that and afford people the opportunity for an education that reflects what they want to get.
Children are returning to the classroom, but there is no dispute that the COVID lockdown has set our children back in their education and that math and reading skills have declined. Further, there is a significant percentage of children that have not returned to the public classroom for reasons unknown to the schools and the Office of Public Instruction. What do you believe needs to change to improve our public education and improve children's test scores?
I think one of the most important things is probably one of the most simple and fundamental things is getting back to the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic. As we see these increased disparities between racial, social, and ethnic or economic groups, we start to see a divide and perhaps a situation where there may be bullying or whatever, and it increases the likelihood of a student not wanting to go back to school. And now that we are in the era that we are, that's more or less a free-for-all, students are not required, and there's no follow-up on it, on why the student's not there, or at least to verify that they're not getting some sort of education, because a student that is not receiving any education at all is absolutely being failed by the government. And the government needs to provide and ensure that our students are receiving an education and setting themselves up to be productive members of our society and our economy.
Governor Inslee has taken several actions in recent years to direct his agencies, especially the Department of Ecology and the Building Council, to adopt rules to implement his environmental goals. Many impacted stakeholders view this aggressive rulemaking action to be a legislative responsibility and not within the powers of a non-elected body. What are your views on this issue, and if elected, what actions will you take to return decision-making to the legislature?
This is a good one. So as a former general contractor that focused on home performance and building efficiency, looking at some of these changes they've made are kind of puzzling to me. Not all of them are particularly effective or best bang for buck scenarios that could have been mandated in a code. There are other options that would net the same results but cost less money. which is especially important to me in the time where we have a housing crisis and the cost of living that we have. We need to be sensitive to policies that we've adopted affecting the cost of living for folks. We also need to look at the net results from the policies that we've enacted. So, if we have a goal of having a more comfortable and a more efficient home, which is less expensive for the occupant to heat or cool, that's a great thing. But we can't do it at the expense of the occupant at the same time. So, in other words, there are things that we can do that are basically budget neutral, but yield the net result of the efficiency improvements, and those are items that I would support, and I definitely would support taking that away from a non-elected board and restoring that to the legislature.
The Puget Sound Auto Theft Task Force officers placed the blame for the dramatic increase in auto thefts on two pieces of legislation which were preventing them from doing their job. The first severely restricts police ability to pursue the criminal. The second law prevents officers from talking to suspected criminals that are juveniles without an attorney present. As a result, it is believed that gangs are hiring minors to commit crimes. Do you believe that their assessment is accurate? And if so, what will you do to correct this problem if elected?
So, as a resident of the east side of Tacoma and a business owner on the east side of Tacoma, and having gone on ride-alongs with both the Tacoma Police Department and the Lakewood Police Department recently, I think that assessment is 100% accurate, and I think it's a 100% result of those pieces of legislation, and I believe that we need to repeal them and go back to the previous policies that we were under. And if we do need to take a look at changing our criminal justice system, it needs to be in a manner that doesn't net us with a free-for-all, because that's effectively what we're dealing with right now.
Hey, this is one of those long questions that may be longer than your answer. One of the state's actuaries and the research organization, the Washington Policy Center, find that Washington Care's Long-Term Care Act is and will continue to be insolvent by at least $15 billion unless the mandatory payroll tax is increased substantially. Further, the benefit allowed under the law is $36,500, which is well understood to be an amount inadequate for any long-term care for more than a few short months. The legislature placed a constitutional amendment on the ballot to create additional funding for the program. It failed 54 to 46%. The only action last session by the legislature was to create more exemptions to the mandatory tax and delay the tax for a year. This issue must be addressed in the coming session. What do you propose for a solution to the long-term health care program?
So I completely agree that the long-term health care as proposed is insolvent, and as a business owner, we actually encouraged and provided for private long-term care for our employees to replace that out of concern that the state's policy would never deliver, and especially for the limitations within the policy as proposed, that if you move, you can't take advantage of it, and some of the other portions of it. I do think that payroll taxes are a very regressive tax on the lower income, and I think that if we are going to invest or look in programs to provide long-term care, they need to be ones that really don't disproportionately affect the lower end of the economic scale. And in general, I would favor repealing that program altogether and perhaps looking at strategies with the private sector, with insurance companies, that perhaps we can come up with more affordable solutions, something along the lines of a comparable HSA or a 401 that could be invested in and retained by the person and not have to risk losing your investment and retaining your care.
State Supreme Court has agreed to a direct review of the lower court's decision declaring that the legislature acted illegally in passing the capital gains tax. The lower court stated that the application of the capital gains tax meets the definition of an income tax which is restricted by the Constitution. This decision is expected prior to the legislature convening in 2023. What is your position on the current capital gains tax, and what legislative action, if any, is needed on this issue?
I believe this is a definite repeal and not replace. I believe it's unconstitutional, and I believe it's a play by the progressives in our state to try and capitalize on the quote-unquote 1%. We do have some of the richest people in the world that reside in Washington, but I think it's short-sighted that they don't actually make much income. Their incomes are from other sources. So, in general, I would repeal it, not replace it, and we'll look for really improving the economy and growing people's ability to purchase things and increase revenues from the sales tax from a more bountiful economy.
This is just a question where I get to say the word ergonomics. Injuries in the workplace caused by repetitive motion, such as a grocery clerk, the price of products is regulated by the federal government, and our state labor and industries implements that regulation. These regulations are known as ergonomic regulations. Organized labor pushed a bill last session to impose heavier regulation at the state level and to increase the compensation of workers' comp to workers. Businesses, especially small business, opposed the state exceeding an already stringent federal rule. The bill passed the House in a party line vote and failed to be brought to a vote on the Senate floor in the waning days of the session. What is your view of the issue, and if elected, how will you vote if this issue is brought back in the 2023 session?
Excuse me, as an employer, I certainly support workplace safety, and having done some trades in my life, I am aware of the effects of repetitive motions. I know, even though I'm not an electrician, now that I'm 40, when I twist more than 2 or 3 wire nuts, my hands start cramping up. So I am sensitive to those issues. And I think in 2022, there's enough data out there that perhaps we can start looking at maybe changing shifts for people or changing tasks and alternating it so they're not exposed to those type of things. So in general, I think there's a smarter strategy to protect and ensure workplace safety by working with both labor and business owners to change our practices and our activities and the tasks. But I do not favor onerous regulation or the impacts that it has impacts on business, which in turn has unintended consequences on employees.
This is the last question. Are you familiar with the most recent state's forecast by the Economic Forecast Council? If so, what is the projected surplus or deficit at this time? How does the legislature need to address the budget next session?
You know, you got me on probably one of the most important things that I should not. So I'm going to take a stab, since we cannot fiscally manage ourselves and say we're forecasted for a deficit. And I believe that's largely because of irresponsible spending, of enacting programs that don't work. I think when we look, in the last 4 to 6 years specifically, the state and local governments have invested more in roads, they've invested more in schools, they've invested more in the homeless situation. Spending, zero results, and the problem's worse. So I think we need to take a look at how we're using our current tax dollars, the effectiveness of our policies and agencies, and we need to get results for people.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and now you have 3 minutes for a closing statement.
Well, it's convenient that the closing statement comes right after the question that I didn't have the answer for. But, thanks everybody for being here. I'm still polishing myself as a public speaker, and I appreciate everybody's support and your attendance here. I'd just like to say that, my candidacy is 100% because we're just not getting what we deserve from government. We do not have the representative that we need. The representative that we need would be here at this event, looking to learn the views of constituents and also share their positions so constituents could know. And that's why I'm here. And afterwards, I'd love to speak with you and have some information out to, of course, get an email, check out my website or my Facebook, because I think that a representative should be fully accessible and should be responding to the needs of their constituents and not to a party. So I would appreciate your vote. Thanks for having me here tonight. Short words on the closeout, but thank you.
Now I want to afford you the opportunity to mingle since we had you locked up in the back.
The only thing I showed up early for.